Sibling rivalries can be intense in any context, but especially in royal families. After all, royal rivalries between siblings often have geopolitical repercussions, with entire kingdoms at stake. If there's one thing royals have learned throughout history, it's the importance of having an heir and a spare, one child to inherit the throne and another on standby in case anything happens to the first. Although this theoretically makes sense, it has also fostered royal rivalry when soon-to-be kings and queens must contend with other siblings who have legitimate claims to the throne. How can a monarch consolidate his or her own authority, and how can younger siblings make a play for the throne? One solution is straightforward: if risky, eliminate the competition. Unlike patient royal heirs, some soon-to-be monarchs have killed their siblings to ensure that they never pose a threat. Conversely, queen or king siblings have schemed against their crowned family members to usurp their position and claim authority for themselves. At the same time, not all royal rivalries have ended in bloodshed. Some royals simply want their siblings' support, and that can get complicated when a monarch has to juggle a number of competing responsibilities. From fratricide to smear campaigns and everything in between, these rivalries and family feuds demonstrate that there's nothing inherently noble about royal families. They can be just as dysfunctional as the rest of us. Welcome to History Mystery. Today, we look at the most intense royal sibling rivalries from history. Kindly subscribe, share and like the video to support us. Ottoman ruler Merm III kills his brothers. When monarchs pass with multiple children, succession can become a fatal game of musical chairs. After all, siblings weren't just brothers or sisters, they were rivals to the throne. Ottoman rulers came up with a violent solution, the so-called law of fratricide. Introduced by 15th century Sultan Merm II, the law empowered rulers to dispose of their brothers to prevent conflict or challenges to the throne. Merm III came to power in 1595, long after the previous Merm had passed, and was enthusiastic about enforcing the law of fratricide. Merm III murdered 19 of his brothers. When Merm III was crowned, he called his 19 brothers into the throne room. He told them they had nothing to fear, for he had only brought them there to be circumcised. In the next room, the assassins were waiting. One by one, the princes trooped in. One by one, they were throttled with a silken bowstring. The youngest was only 11. Merm III didn't stop at killing his living brothers. He also executed 15 women pregnant with his father's unborn children. He thus consolidated his authority through bloodshed by killing the competition. Aurangzeb beheads his brother. Shah Jahan of the Mughal Empire oversaw the construction of the Taj Mahal, a monument in memory of his favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal. One of the greatest legacies of Shah Jahan's reign is thus associated with everlasting love. However, at least one of his sons didn't share his father's reverence for familial affection. As Shah Jahan weakened, he proclaimed that his eldest son Dara Shikoh would succeed him. Aurangzeb, Dara's younger brother, did not like this, and inaugurated a power struggle. Their armies clashed, ultimately ending in Dara Shikoh's defeat. Aurangzeb showed no mercy to his older brother. Instead, he decapitated Dara Shikoh in 1659 and allegedly sent his head to their grief-stricken father. In another act of fratricide, Aurangzeb had another brother, Murad, charged with murder and executed. Thanks in part to his calculated fratricide, Aurangzeb does not enjoy the same reputation as some of his Mughal predecessors. Despite his influence over a 50-year reign, he remains one of the most hated men in Indian history. Louis XVI brother questions the king. In 1770, a 14-year-old Austrian princess married the heir to the French crown. When her husband assumed the throne 4 years later, the couple ruled as King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the last king and queen of France before Revolution. The French court never fully warmed to Marie Antoinette, a fact made even more obvious as the young couple apparently had trouble consummating their marriage. After all, this was a political issue. Only through consummation could Louis father an heir to the throne. Without a legitimate heir, his younger brother Louis Stanislas Xavier, the Count of Provence, was next in the line of succession. The Count was only too happy to be close to the throne. he made it clear that he was not an ardent loyalist to his brother and sister-in-law. Instead, he and his wife entangled themselves in court intrigues against the royal couple. They heard and encouraged rumors and gossip about the king and queen's private life. In 1778, Marie Antoinette finally gave birth to a baby, Marie-Thérèse. She wasn't a male heir to the throne, but she did quiet rumors about the couple's infertility. The Count used the occasion of his niece's christening to besmirch his brother and sister-in-law yet again. During the ceremony, he stood in as godfather on behalf of the child's real godfather, the King of Spain. Through his winks and nudges, the Count suggested that his niece was not the king's legitimate daughter, and, implicitly, that his brother wasn't virile enough to father his own child. The Count was thus subtly accusing his sister-in-law of having an affair. Ultimately, rumor, gossip, and scandal played a significant role in delegitimizing Marie Antoinette and the royal court in the years leading up to the French Revolution. In this sense, the Count's pillorying of his brother and sister-in-law was part of the same sentiment in the court of public opinion that would eventually lead to their downfall. And their downfall came mercilessly. When Louis XVI was beheaded during the French Revolution, the Count reportedly was not very emotional. Roughly 20 years later, he would become King of France. Mary I and Elizabeth I. Before they ruled as Queen Mary I and Queen Elizabeth I, the Tudor half-sisters shared a similar position in their father Henry VIII's life. As daughters, they were less valuable to Henry than his young son and heir Prince Edward, so they generally lived on the periphery of their father's life. After all, Henry wanted a son to succeed him. The succession, he felt, wasn't secure in the hands of a daughter. Initially, Mary and Elizabeth's shared status ensured that they had a positive relationship. But things were complicated in the treacherous environment of the Tudor line of succession. Although their half-brother inherited the throne in 1547 when Henry passed, Edward reigned for only 6 years. His passing at the age of 15 inaugurated a power struggle. The throne should have passed to Mary by birthright, but there was one big problem: Mary was Catholic, and Henry VIII had christened his kingdom a Protestant one when he established the Anglican Church of England in 1534. To block Mary from becoming queen after his demise, Edward had named the family's Protestant cousin Lady Jane Grey as heir to the throne. But Jane's reign barely started before it ended. The teen was queen for only 9 days before Mary ousted her. Although Mary was now queen, she didn't feel secure in her position. After all, Elizabeth was no longer a child. Worse for Mary, Elizabeth was a Protestant claimant and thus a convenient rallying figure for dissenters. To defang Elizabeth and keep a close eye on her, Mary imprisoned her in the Tower of London for suspected treason. However, there was no meaningful proof of her disloyalty, so she was eventually released and placed under house arrest. Mary was hesitant to make Elizabeth her heir. She married and tried to conceive, but that didn't work out. She also attempted to convert her sister to the Catholic faith. It didn't take. Ultimately, Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558 after Mary passed at the age of 42. She restored Protestantism, but also had to field questions about succession. Elizabeth didn't have any siblings to lock up, but she imprisoned another family member, her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. Caracalla kills his brother. When the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus passed in modern-day York, England, in 211 CE, he believed that his 2 sons, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, aka Caracalla, and Publius Septimius Geta, should rule the Roman Empire together. Unfortunately, neither man was interested in sharing power with the other, and the discord between brothers intensified into a full-on power struggle. To get Geta out of the way for once and for all, Caracalla turned to fratricide. As the senator and chronicler Cassius Dio recounted, Caracalla lured his brother to a meeting with their mother, who knew nothing of the plot to end Geta's life. Geta was killed right in their mother's presence. It is said that he died on his mother's breasts. Caracalla survived his brother by only 6 years, and his act of fratricide foreshadowed his own violent end, while in modern-day Turkey, one of his own soldiers assassinated him. The Roman historian Herodian claimed that when news of Caracala's assassination reached Rome, senators were happy to hear it, a fact that underscores how loathsome his reign had been. Richard I's overthrow attempt. When King Henry II assumed the throne of England in 1154, he inherited a kingdom that had been divided by civil war for decades. Since 1135, Henry's mother, Empress Matilda, had been fighting her cousin Stephen over the English throne. Matilda had been her father's heir, but when he passed, many English barons refused the idea of a female monarch and threw in their lot with Stephen instead. When Henry, Matilda's son, came to the throne, he knew he would have to unite a fractured kingdom. And he did that, or at least tried. Like his mother, some of Henry's greatest challenges came from within his own family, as his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine and several of his sons rebelled against his authority. It's no wonder, then, that Henry's children continued familial discord after his passing in 1189. The crown passed to his eldest surviving son, who ruled as Richard I, known to history and legend as Richard the Lionheart. He reigned for a decade. As a Crusader king, he spent much of his time leading troops on the Third Crusade or pillaging castles. In total, he was physically present in England as king for only 6 or 7 months. Richard's absence provided an opportunity for John, his younger brother, to consolidate more power. Although Richard likely sniffed out John's intentions and exiled him while he was abroad, John returned to England and stirred up trouble. He ousted the man Richard had left to act as regent in his stead, established his own court, and amassed his own network of supporters. John continued to challenge his brother by questioning if he was even still alive, and plotting with the King of France to assume authority of the English crown. Richard ultimately returned from the Crusades, but he passed in 1199. Only then did John rightfully inherit his brother's throne. Genghis Khan kills over fish. Genghis Khan helped the Mongol Empire become history's largest, albeit one built through ruthless conquest. Although historians have been quick to point out that the Mongol Empire was more than its merciless military campaigns, that ruthlessness nonetheless was embodied within Genghis Khan's family life. Before he was Genghis Khan, he was simply Temujin, a younger son of the leader in a large tribal community. His family was left isolated and vulnerable after his father's murder. By the time Temujin was around 14, he had developed an intense rivalry with his older half-brother Bekta, who claimed to be head of the family after their father passed. Temujin did not agree with his brother's leadership, so after Bekta supposedly hadn't doled out fish he had caught, his younger brother slayed him. Temujin thus secured his place as leader of the family. From this position of authority, he amassed greater connections, influence, and power, and ultimately became head of the Mongol Empire. Cleopatra and sibling civil war. Cleopatra VII may have been the final pharaoh of Egypt, but she achieved power through grit, determination, and warfare against her own family. When her father passed in 51 BCE, she and her younger brother husband Ptolemy XIII inherited the Egyptian throne as co-rulers. It soon became clear the siblings were not suited to a power-sharing arrangement, especially as Ptolemy tried to consolidate authority. Tensions between them boiled over into a civil war, and Cleopatra fled in exile. She found support in her war against her brother in the form of Julius Caesar, the Roman general and statesman who arrived in Alexandria in 48 BCE. She joined forces with Caesar, they became lovers and worked to repel Ptolemy's troops. The young king did not survive. The civil war wasn't just between Cleopatra and Ptolemy. Their sister Arsinoe joined the civil war, throwing in her lot with her brother. When Ptolemy passed, Arsinoe stepped into his shoes in the war against her sister. Caesar defeated her, too. Unlike Ptolemy, Arsinoe survived, and Caesar captured her, dispatched her to Rome to march in his triumphal parade, and later exiled her to Ephesus. After the passing of Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra married another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, while involved in a romantic partnership with Caesar. This Ptolemy also met an early end. Some people allege Cleopatra was behind his demise, and also that of Arsinoe at Ephesus a few years later. These passings paved the way for Cleopatra to consolidate power as Egypt's queen. Although she ultimately lost Egypt to Rome, no one can doubt her devotion to her kingdom. Edward VIII's abdication. In 1936, Great Britain's King Edward VIII did something that was previously unthinkable. After less than a year as king, he took off his crown and abdicated the throne. Why? Because, as he claimed, he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, an American whose status as a divorced woman meant that the Church of England, the very church that Edward officially headed, would never recognize the marriage. The crown would not allow this, so it was now passed to Edward's younger brother George, a mild-mannered, duty-bound prince who never expected or wanted to be king. Although the brothers once had a relatively good bond, that changed when Edward began his relationship with Simpson. His decision to abdicate only worsened his relationship with George, who felt as if his brother had thrust the crown atop his head. The relationship further deteriorated as Edward sought rights and titles from the new king, who was not willing to give them. While George was not happy about the transfer of power, he proved to be a capable and popular king. He led Great Britain through World War II with a steady hand. His daughter later inherited the throne from him and became the country's longest-reigning monarch, Elizabeth II. William the Conqueror's son and the chamber pot. In 1066, a Norman duke successfully invaded England and ended hundreds of years of Anglo-Saxon rule. He reigned as William I, more commonly known as William the Conqueror. By the 1070s, William had three surviving, legitimate sons, Robert Curthose, William Rufus, and Henry, who brought new meaning to the concept of sibling rivalry. Although Robert was the eldest, he often clashed with his father and brothers. Things came to a head when his younger brothers ribbed Robert in a way that crossed a line. According to medieval chronicler Orderic Vitalis, William and Henry joined their brother Robert in Lagal, where he was living at the time, and that's when things went south. They began to play dice in the upper gallery, as knights do. They made a great noise about it and soon began to pour water down on Robert and his sycophants underneath. Then two associates said to Robert, "Why do you put up with such insults? Just look at the way your brothers have climbed up above your head and are defiling you and us with filth to your shame. Don't you see what this means? Even a blind man could. Unless you punish this insult without delay, it will be all over with you. You will never be able to hold your head again." Hearing these words, he leaped to his feet in a towering rage and dashed to the upper room to take his brothers unawares. Robert's attack on his brothers sparked a fight so disruptive that the king had to come restore the peace, but he did nothing to punish his younger sons. William's weak intercession did little to satisfy Robert, who tried to exact revenge by taking over a castle in ruin. Although William foiled his son's plan, Robert and his father butted heads for the rest of William's life, and William, Rufus and Henry always took their father's side. Robert sometimes schemed with Philip of France against his father, and even clashed with William on the field of battle. The continued family conflict all but ensured that Robert, while the eldest son, would not be William's heir. Instead, the English crown passed to Robert's younger brother William Rufus, who ruled as William II. Napoleon's brother exiled. Unlike many of his royal contemporaries, Napoleon Bonaparte was not descended from regal dynasties. He was connected to nobility from modern-day Italy. Nonetheless, he rose through the ranks in the French army to assume power and crown himself emperor in December 1804. Even though he was a self-made royal, he encountered the same problem many royals faced: troublesome siblings. Lucien Bonaparte, Napoleon's younger brother, was idealistic where his older brother was ambitious. Deeply devoted to the ideals of the French Revolution, Lucien joined the Jacobins, who envisioned and tried to implement a radical transformation of France. Although he supported Napoleon's rise, Lucien came to regret that his brother was willing to sacrifice democracy for authority. He often criticized Napoleon, which drove a wedge between the brothers Bonaparte. The nail in the coffin of their relationship came when Lucien clandestinely married Alexandrine de Blechamp instead of going through with the political union Napoleon had hoped to make between his brother and a Spanish princess. Napoleon was furious with his brother, so Lucien went into self-imposed exile in Rome and the US. Ironically, exile, whether willing or not, is something both brothers ultimately had in common. Napoleon would die in exile on the island of St. Helena in 1821. Europe divided into three. Charlemagne, which translates to Charles the Great, had that nickname for a reason. Over the course of his reign, he expanded an empire that comprised large portions of modern-day France and Germany. However, Charlemagne's empire didn't remain intact. After he passed in 814, his son Louis took over as emperor. Because Louis had three sons, Lothair, Pepin, aka Pippin, and Louis, he attempted to carve out territory for each of them. The birth of a fourth son, Charles, disrupted the delicate balance between Louis's older sons, and tensions flamed up. When Louis himself passed in 840, civil war tore apart his legacy. The once great empire of Charlemagne was no more. Instead, it had been divided into three different parts for Lothair, Louis, and Charles, as Pepin predeceased their father. William and Harry Windsor. Prince William of Wales and his younger brother Harry, Duke of Sussex, may not be calling the banners to meet on the field of battle. Yet their strained relationship puts a modern, if bloodless, spin on the classic theme of sibling rivalry in royal history. Born to King Charles III, who was still Prince of Wales at the time, and his then-wife Princess Diana, William and Harry didn't have an idyllic childhood, despite growing up in palaces with a staff at their beck and call. Their family life was fractured, as their parents infamously divorced in 1996 after years of a rocky marriage and messy separation. The brothers Wales were also bonded through tragedy at a young age when their mother passed in a car accident in 1997. The whole world watched as the two boys, William was 15 and Harry was 12, walked behind their mother's casket with dignity and devastation etched so plainly on their young faces. Their shared tragedy led many to believe the brothers were bonded for life. After all, in her 2010 book about William and Harry, royal biographer Katie Nicholl went so far as to write, "It is not simply a case of William being the heir and Harry the spare. The bond between them runs far deeper. Together they see themselves as Team Wales." Whatever bond they may have shared, the royal brothers seem to have had a very public, very painful falling out. Some sources claim that Harry felt William did not support his marriage in 2018 to American divorcee Meghan Markle. William even allegedly told Harry he found his new sister-in-law rude and abrasive. When Harry attempted to push back on how the press treated his wife, including the racism in much of their coverage about her, and protect her from documented threats, he felt his older brother did little to help. In 2019, these tensions apparently boiled over into a physical confrontation in which Harry claims William knocked him to the floor. He landed on the dog's bowl, which cracked under his back, the pieces cutting into him. He laid there for a moment, dazed, then got to his feet and told William to get out. Incidents like these paint a darker, more dysfunctional portrait of the contemporary royal family. It's only one of many scandals that have plagued Elizabeth II's children and grandchildren. Thank you for watching. Which of the rivalries do you think is the most intense? Let's chat in the comment box.